discuss today. Just to welcome some highly respected, regarded scholars who will be joining us in the debates. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion today about this book. And like Satang did mention, we have also tried, the book has been dedicated to Professor Ngwena, given his very important role in the issues relating to sexual reproductive rights in the continent. And of course, I think in the next few days, will also be another release of a book on abortion reform in Africa, of course, which also, was spearheaded by Professor Ngwena. So that will also be, dedicated to in small honor. Without much ado, I just want to welcome you and thank everyone for making your time to attend. I'm really looking forward to the debate, the discussion in the next 1.5 hours, about this book. So welcome, and over to you, Satang.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Durejai, for your support as well, especially as a reviewer during the colloquium, but also in your current role as well. The Center's invaluable support for this project as well. As I did mention before, so the volume itself is an outcome of a colloquium that I co-convened with Professor Ngwena back in 2022. And so it brings together a group of contributors, both seasoned as well as emerging scholars and practitioners, some of whom are also survivors as well, and from various disciplines, because really what we wanted to do, as I said, was go beyond the traditional human rights framework, but really looking at the complexities of FGM criminalization. And so we have, and I do believe that we have quite a number of the contributors as well online, and we'll spotlight them later on as well. So the book itself is about 400 pages or so. So not too long in that sense. 13 chapters that are grouped in 4 parts. So part 1 unpacks the cultural context of FGM. Part 2 focuses on the ethics, law, and criminalization generally. And then part 3, and I should say probably this is my favorite part, given my own background as an African feminist. Part 3 focuses on survivor narratives and feminist perspectives. And then part 4 focuses generally on legal cases and societal responses as well. Again, many thanks to the contributors as well. But I do have, at this point, I do have the honor to introduce Professor Farida Bandar, Professor of Law at SOAS, University of London, who graciously authored the foreword, and so we invite you to provide your reflections on the scholarly significance of the book as well. So over to you, Professor Bandar. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Pashona Culture, Murora Patricia Ngwena, welcome, and thank you for coming to join us to honor our Mkoma Charles. And obviously, I think because we dedicate the book to him, we wanted to start by honoring and remembering him. And I know that he is daily missed by his family, but his encouragement, support, mentorship, and kindness can be seen in this book, which is dedicated to his life and his memory. And I think one of his greatest legacies actually is both Professor Ebenezer, Dr. Nabaneh, Satang from now, and all of his students. And the fact that they have continued to honor him in this way, I think speaks to the kind of human being that he was. And so I'm grateful to you, Satang, for this invitation. So to start again, just to say thank you very much, and many congratulations to Satang for editing such an impressive collection, and also to the contributors who've produced such an enduring work. And what the book does, it takes us through an FGM, taking in an historical, legal, and social-cultural developments. We learn about early colonial attempts to ban the practice and the local resistance. And latterly, FGM has come under a lot of intense human rights focus, with every treaty body advocating for its abolition. I think the most sophisticated in this regard is Article 5 of the Maputo Protocol, which calls for both prevention as well as rehabilitation for those who've been affected by providing them with social-psychological support. And I think another powerful thing is instead of hearing about people who've been directly impacted, we hear from them. And so I think it's also, a major contribution. Accompanying the rise in human rights has been a consideration of the efficacy or the usefulness of criminal law. Does it help to throw people in prison for fulfilling what they perceive as their religiously or culturally required practices? While we may argue about who is the we who is defining the requirement, the fact remains from the statistics that are given by UNICEF and used in the text that it remains a pervasive problem. The recent Gambian attempts to repeal the anti-FGM law and the popularity of those attempts with many should give us all pause for thought about how useful law can be in tackling this practice. What has also been interesting, and I think what the book actually provides in a really original way, are the new cases that are coming through, not least a case brought by a doctor arguing that female genital mutilation constitutes a right to culture. And what is challenging is it's framed this challenge as a decolonial pro-Africanist move. How should it be countered? What strategies should be used? And I think the book engages this. So I think this is an original contribution of the book that needs to be marked. One of the things that I recall when Satang first sent me her introduction, and just for the record, I had 3 days to write it, was the continuation after so many efforts. And it brought to mind a song by Billie Holiday, Good Morning Heartache. Thought we said goodbye last night, or good night last night, meaning we have been having this conversation for so long. What will it take? And I think while many scholars would have wearied of it, it is a tribute to this new generation that they have decided to take on the mantle of those who have gone on before. Efwa Dokenu with Cutting the Rose, Nadia Tubia with her work in gynecology, and also as a human rights advocate. And they have added their own flavor, shall we say, by bringing us up to date. So I think, or I know, and I have absolutely no doubt that this book is going to be the go-to encyclopedia for consultation by students, practitioners, and policymakers globally. Many congratulations on an excellent publication, and thank you for inviting me. And Mkoma Patricia, Aurora Patricia, we stay with you and we honor Charles. Thank you. We can't hear you, Satang.
Oh, there you go. Yes. Thank you so much, Professor Banda, for the forward, for your generosity to write the forward in 3 days. And as always, she writes incredibly well. So I mean, she could have done that in her sleep as well. But I also just want to take a moment as well to celebrate you, to say that Farida is more than just a scholar. She is equally a formidable force, especially for younger African feminists like myself who are engaged in this space as well. And so we're very privileged to walk in your legacy and to learn from you. So thank you as always for your support. Our next speaker, and so in addition to Farida's forward, we did have and we're extremely, extremely grateful as well for the endorsement by various actors, particularly those that are engaged with in the African human rights system, as Professor Durejai highlighted, particularly the Maputo Protocol, as well as the African Committee of Experts, the African Children's Charter as well, are very vital norms and standards in relation to addressing harmful practices, particularly FGM within the African context. And as we know that there was a joint general comment that was also adopted both by the African Commission as well as the African Committee of Experts. And so we're extremely grateful that both of the special rapporteurs of both the African Commission on Human and People's Rights as well as the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child did write endorsement for the book. And we do have we will have both of them join us as well. Honorable Janet Ramatulai Salanjai, the Vice Chair and the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women in Africa of the African Commission, will join us a little bit later. But we do have we have Honorable Kembo Takim Gatsin Hamai, the Special Rapporteur on Child Marriage and Other Harmful Practices of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, joined us today. So we're extremely grateful for you reading as well as endorsing the book. And over to you, Honorable Kembo. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Satang. I think it is a renewed pleasure for me to intervene in these circumstances. I think I read the book with passion. I found that all the chapters of the book are easily readable with high substantial values. I also find that the analysis shows various perspectives, legal, medical, ethical approaches, not forgetting victim-centered contribution. On this point, the need to insist on the voice of the victim cannot be overstated, and it should be the starting point. I think all of this help us rethink how in Africa we do embark on the politics of criminalization. From the journey up till now, I think there is an emphasis that needs to be laid. The emphasis of persuading but not coercing. Because if, as we have seen from countries to countries, any push for criminalization in terms of top-down approach generates a pushback. It generates a pushback because people feel coerced, and this can also be perceptible throughout the process, from the times of decolonization to nowadays. We see from the examples of the Kikuyu women, which is cited in the book, they were upholding the practice as a challenge to the colonial orders. But also, we also saw in the book the case of the Ugandan activists who underwent FGM in terms of challenging the current politics of the nation. We also see that even the Gambian case is also a real example of this pushback realities, because people want to feel seen, people want to feel noticed, people want to feel heard. They also want to be considered by their leaders. And today I was reading the reading the case that was filed in the Gambia, and I think one of the arguments of the applicant is that namely the report that the National Assembly tabled did not consider all the position. So they want to feel seen, they want to feel noticed, they want to be considered. And I think it is the consideration of those views and perception that is also at the heart of rethinking the solutions that can be brought into the light. If we think the cultural solution, namely the alternative rites of passage, that also needs the real and concrete participation of the people. We should think of alternative rites of passage, which is meaningful to people, which is meaningful to the individuals, which is anchoring them in their own society rather than secluding them. I think we must think of solution that gives value to the person and affirms the person in a particular setting. On culture, yes, the cultural argument is more often than not brought to the limelight. But on culture, we say that culture is made by people. Culture matters, but culture also evolves. It is changed not only because it is imposed by outsiders. It is changed because the people feel the necessity to do so. And I think in advocating for the change, we need to use all the knowledge that is gathered to contribute to the change, to convince the people that we need to convince. Because if they are not convinced, we still get the pushback. And my sentiment is that the initiative of criminalizing FGM on the continent has not yet departed from the colonial masters approach. The colonial masters approach, the vertical, arrogant, and master-led approach, which is igniting resistance. And it is no surprise to many that our politics of criminalization is so far not successful to some extent. So my call is that we should work for our people. We should work with our people, because it is not a matter of them. It is a matter of us, because all what is achieved is an asset to us collectively as a community. And I think we must engage in this endeavor from that perspective. And this entails listening to others, listening to opposing views, because they feel they also have a voice. We need to consider those dissenting views with all due respect. And on that, I think these issues of dissenting views is so delicate. It's so delicate to manage, especially when you need to fight the issue from within. And recently, I was watching a documentary on Jahadu Kure, the Gambian activist, and she was torn apart. She was torn apart between the problem as it is in her own family and her own communities, and her public advocacy, because she was going to various circles up to meeting the Secretary General of the United Nations. But the fact that the issue was so entrenched in her own community was a real problem. To her, and she needed to have a subtle, gentle, and respectful approach towards her own parents, to convince them not to get cut her own sister. And because she was saying, what is the use of her endeavor, of her advocacy, if at the end of the day in her own family the practice is still continuing? What is the need of convincing the whole world without convincing her own people? I think that is that's the problem which we need to tackle. And then I think the book gives us different challenges, but also different views, which will help us, namely as members of treaty bodies, to adequately advocate, to adequately also advise states on how to do on the way forward. But I think the way forward here is to have a respectful approach, even to the opposing parties, trying to convince them, not to coerce them. I think it is the approach which I have the strong feeling that can help make progress on this issue. So for me, I highly recommend the book to the various stakeholders, members of treaty bodies, members of INGOs, because I think they need also to know what are our challenges. Nobody can fight the fight more than us, because it is an issue which is it is an issue which is an issue to us. If we solve the issue, we will be the gain. We will be the one making the gains, and the gains will not be the gains from the outsider. So let us work throughout, and then not letting the feeling that the fight is being led by outsider. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Kembo, for taking the time to read in the book and for your endorsement, which we're incredibly grateful for, especially as the Special Rapporteur on Harmful Practices of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child as well. And I mean, and I do think, if I can say so myself, especially just to reassure everybody about the timely manner of this publication as well, given that recently we've also been engaged in the research that has emerged, especially monitoring trials and prosecutions in Kenya, where we've seen victims of FGM being prosecuted themselves, right? So really thinking about the way and the manner that criminal law is set up, and how in instances where it's supposed to protect the very people that it's meant to protect and ensure their rights, in the end as well, it invariably punishes those people, same people as well. Simpiwe, just to say, Honorable Commissioner Janet Salanjai is in the waiting room, so if you can admit her so she can get in as well. I wanted to, before we go to the commissioner for her remarks, I also do want to spotlight the various chapters, if you can give me, because I do, as I indicated, that this work was a long time in the coming. At some point, we were like, is it going to happen? And so again, I know I've been saying many thanks to the contributors for their patience. And I really mean they were very, very patient as well in that instance. And so I wanted to just spotlight the various chapters. As I indicated, there are 13 chapters. One of the introductory chapter is my chapter, which is titled Beyond Legislation, examining the efficacy of criminalization of female genital mutilation in Africa. So just to re-echo as well, I think part of the, and which we did in the preface, but also in the introductory chapter as well, was really noting, for instance, how globally we have more than 60 countries that have criminalized FGM in some form, right? And we do know that these are also found in various laws. Sometimes they are standalone laws, like what we have in Kenya, as well as in other African countries, but also that we find them in all the pieces of laws, right? Whether those are the penal codes, the Women's Act, the Children's Act, the Domestic Violence Act, and so forth. And so out of the 60, we have more than 25 within the African continent, right? I think what was really interesting is to sort of do a comparison and say, this is a solid number of African countries that have criminalized FGM, but we also know that globally more than 250 million girls are caught, and majority of those also live within the continent. In terms of what has been in relation, both in terms of the impact, but particularly, as we said, in terms of the politics around it, the complexities around criminalization, that sets up limits the legal responses, especially the criminal responses to FGM as well. And just quickly, so the other, so chapter 2 is by Folashade Rosie Adegbe, on developing homegrown approaches in eradicating FGM across communities in Africa. We also do have a chapter titled The Disabled Genitalia, Countering Dominant Narratives to Ending FGM in Africa, by Ade Johnson, who I've also seen on the call as well. So really bringing in that perspective, especially from that intersection between disability as well as FGM. We do also have the chapter 4 on research and female genital mutilation prevention, evidence from Africa, by Angela Dawson. Under the part on ethics, law, and criminalization, we do have Samuel Kimani, who will give a little brief reflection today, but his chapter 5, focuses on medicalization of FGM, ethical dimensions as well. Chapter 6 is understanding women's right to culture, consent, and the need to prohibit FGM in Kenya. So we're looking at the Kamwar against Attorney General and others case by Emily Kinama. And then chapter 7 is eradicating undesirable cultural or religious practices through criminalization, the need for equity in the case of body modification by modification surgeries by Godfrey Tankwar. on part 3, on survivor narratives and feminist perspectives, retelling the experiences of African women with female genital mutilation through an African feminist lens by Agnes Meroka Mutwa, and then chapter 9 on female genital mutilation, a survivor's narrative. Then on part 4, we have legal cases and societal responses. Then chapter 10 is the cause of beyond reasonable doubt by Kenneth Mahmoud. Chapter 11, should female genital mutilation be decriminalized in Nigeria, an empirical justification from statutory and religious perspectives by Mariam Abdurrahim Mustafa, who's also joining us today. Then chapter 12, a case commentary on the law and advocacy for women in Uganda. We do have Laura Njirikindi going to speak next after this as well. And then finally, chapter 13, female genital mutilation, cutting on the politics of cultural relativism by Fanush Milde. So it is a rich collection. And as I said, just to re-echo as well, what we really wanted this is not just an intellectual or an academic exercise, that this book is really vital in relation to states as it relates to their human rights obligations, but also for scholars and practitioners doing the work on the ground as well. So at this point, I'd like to invite Ms. Laura Njirikindi, the chair of the UN Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls. And as I indicated, she wrote chapter 12, whilst we will then transit to getting Honorable Commissioner Njai to share her comments as well. Thank you. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you so much, Satang. Congratulations. We're here at this milestone, and we thank you so much for your great leadership, including our late professor. So as you said, I did contribute to that chapter on the legal responses now that the frameworks were put in place. So I'd like to delve a little bit into the case of law, Uganda versus the Attorney General. This case was instituted, it's a constitutional case that was instituted in 2007, and it's a case where strategic litigation was effectively used by a celebrated Ugandan lawyer, and she also happened to be a member of parliament. So there was a double advantage there to her advocacy, Honorable Dorabia Mukama. Now, just to very briefly say, her efforts led to the Constitutional Court of Uganda declaring the practice of FGM null and void and unconstitutional in 2010, so 3 years after the case was lodged. But before that, it's important to note that the Parliament of Uganda, just 7 months before the Constitutional Court declared the practice null and void, had passed a draft law, and the president assented to this law in March 2010. So the judgment came out 4 months after the president had assented. So the enabling environment probably contributed. You could argue, I mean, it's up for discussion, but it could have contributed to favorable outcomes from the Constitutional Court, because to argue differently would have created a really awkward position. Now, while the constitutional case and the legislation on FGM, they have been celebrated and hailed as significant achievements, they do face practical and conceptual challenges that warrant reflection in 3 areas. First, there is the issue of the legal change versus the cultural change, and that creates an enforcement gap. Enforcement and compliance remain major issues, and I'm sure from everything I've heard, this is a continent-wide problem, as there have been really few convictions since the law was passed in 2010. Enforcement has been constrained by capacity gaps among the enforcers, but also resources. But there are wider factors than that I'll delve into. Many girls and communities remain unaware also that FGM is illegal, despite a lot of advocacy going on from the groups that were actually working in those communities even before the law was passed. Also, you have unwilling survivors from rural areas who often lack legal resources and access to legal aid and protection. So this increases their vulnerability and the enforcement gap. And also criminalization of the practice serves to drive it underground, leading to clandestine and cross-border relationships with like-minded practicing communities. And in Uganda, this is practiced in 3 countries that have similar cultural orientations. So it is a big challenge. Now, the second issue is the cultural and social resistance to legal prohibitions on FGM. This highlights the complexities of changing deeply rooted practices. Social acceptance of the practice is tied to collective identity and heritage in the issues that practice, resulting in the criminal ban being viewed as cultural domination by the non-practicing cultures. So basically, it looks like a law that was made to target two communities, whereas not. As we all know, this is a human rights issue. It's in the Maputo Protocol. So cultural exceptionalism and the power of the collectives ends up trumping the rights of individual women who are opposed to the practice, but also in this context, imposing external standards like laws can be viewed as cultural imperialism by the affected communities. And this has the unfortunate result of making them close ranks against the external gaze and illustrating that laws and practices do not change deep-seated traditions of communities' integrity and heritage and identity. Now, as has been said by a speaker before me, culture is always evolving based on social, political, and economic factors. But proponents of FGM claim the cultural practice as immutable. And this explains why, to quote somebody who said, legislation is only one part of the jigsaw puzzle to eliminating FGM. Now, thirdly, there is a conceptual challenge in bridging the gap between international human rights standards and local cultural norms. What does it mean in real life? You know, what does it mean if you're sitting somewhere in a rural area and you hear that the Constitutional Court has declared your custom null and void in practice? What does that mean to the affected communities that holds the custom dear? Are they going to wake up the next day and the culture is null and void? Some critics argue that judges who are often urban elites lack the legitimacy to override rural traditions, and that courts should not dictate cultural norms. Now, I wanted to talk a bit about the overlapping identity of the survivors. Some of them are willing parties to the FGM. So it creates a legal paradox. In many cases of FGM, the victim is actually a party to the perpetration of the crime committed against her. And this hampers, of course, evidence gathering and prosecutions due to, of course, the victim and witness fearing to implicate the family and community members involved. Sometimes it's your neighbor next door who was dancing in the rituals. So sometimes it's also fear of reprisals, even where the victim was not willing. Now, this intersectionality, applying an intersectionality lens is really critical in understanding that the identities of women and girls is more complex than just was she a willing victim, was she an unwilling victim, was there an element of choice? It highlights how various social categorizations like ethnicity, culture, and gender intersect to influence women and girls' choices and experience. There is a tension between cultural identity and individual rights in these cases, whereby women may embrace FGM as a means of identity or fulfilling cultural expectations, but this choice is often made within a patriarchal framework that actually limits genuine autonomy. So how free has the choice been made? How freely has the choice been made? So while the law aligns with global human rights protocols, implementing it must consider a balanced approach. And these points have been made very well to respect cultural identities without compromising. So in conclusion, strategic litigation is really critical. And as I saw in Uganda, it did shift the needle to an extent, but it cannot totally eradicate FGM. Laws can cause the paradoxical situation whereby they have reduced reporting of cases of FGM, but the practice has not reduced. Behavioral change takes generation. We are cognizant of how social legal issues evolve, and laws work best alongside education and advocacy. Legal education and particularly community approaches hold the key. Using an intersectional approach to frame the link between anti-FGM laws to health, education, gender-based violence laws remains key, rather than relying solely on criminal justice paradigms to address the issues. And combining litigation with grassroots advocacy and education holds promise for gradual, progressive approaches to eliminating FGM. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura, for your reflection, but also for your chapter as well, and the work that you do through the working group on discrimination against women and girls. Many thanks as well. I do have the privilege of welcoming Honorable Janet Ramatulai Salanjai, the Vice Chair and Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women in Africa of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. They are currently in a session, and we're very grateful. We're very grateful that you can just jump in for a quick couple of minutes just to share your reflections before you leave us. Over to you, Honorable. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Satang, Madam Moderator, Professor Satang, for the opportunity to share my insights and reflection on this very important topical issue and to take part in this book launch. But allow me to stand on the existing protocol because we likely observe. I had to leave the session of the African Commission quickly to just come and join you because I consider this very, very important and very dear to my heart. As the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women and an African woman, as a Gambian also. These are things that, I mean, we all know what the situation of FGM and the current situation that we have in the Gambia. So this is something that, despite my pressing obligations, as part of the Bureau of the African Commission, I felt obliged to come and join you. But allow me to recognize the colleagues from the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, a colleague from the UN system, human rights system also, and also to recognize all the valuable and esteemed authors that have actually taken part in this very important initiative. And of course, yourself as the editor of this very important publication. But also I'd like to thank the Center for Human Rights, University of Pretoria, and the Pretoria University Law Press for this kind invitation to launch the Female Genital Mutilation in Africa, Politics of Criminalisation. I've listened to, I joined when Laura was presenting. I listened to her perspective, and I really agree with some of the things she's raised in terms of the intersectionality and the fact that it should not be just one approach. It has to be a multifaceted approach. But having said that, from my perspective as Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women in Africa, I would like to reiterate the fact that this volume is a significant and timely contribution to the field, offering a rigorous examination of the complex legal landscape surrounding FGM in Africa. As well as we all know, the Maputo Protocol is the only human rights instrument that explicitly refers to FGM under Article 5, whereby state parties shall prohibit and condemn through legislative measures backed by sanctions, and I repeat, backed by sanctions, all forms of female genital mutilation, sacrification, and paramedicalization of female genital mutilation and other practices in order to eradicate them. I think this brings us to the issue of the judicial process. Should it be a judicial process? Should it just be an advocacy tool, right, where you just raise the awareness of the people? But the obligation as provided for and the instrument that we've all adopted is very clear as to what needs to be done. But that notwithstanding, there's a lot that we can do in terms of having the multi-sectoral approach, having the intersectional approach as we try to implement this particular provision. So this collection is not just a book. It is a call to action. It is a meticulously researched and passionately argued examination of legal complexities that perpetuate and that can ultimately eradicate FGM. I think if you look at all the chapters and all the perspectives shared, putting all those things together, we can go a long way in working towards the eradication of FGM. The book draws on diverse perspectives that shape the discourse around FGM, offering a nuanced undertaking of the cultural, social, and legal factors at play. I think when we talk about the cultural, social, and legal factors at play, we cannot discount the fact that despite the fact that since time immemorial, FGM has always been considered a cultural thing. Now we have the religious dimension also. And when it comes to matters of religion, it becomes more tricky because people and their faith is very difficult. And sometimes when you have, like, in quotes, religious leaders, because for you to be a leader, you have to actually make sure that you actually lead properly and you lead your flock the right direction. That's why I have it in quotes, where you have religious leaders actually quoting the scriptures and using that to justify the practice. So it just goes beyond the woman in the village, like Laura has indicated, saying that this is my culture. So why will you criminalize my culture? Now it comes to between you and my God. And that takes it to a different dimension. And that is why the approach also is also very important, where sometimes you use the culture, which evolves, like we are told, but religion also to use the same scriptures to debunk the myth that the proponents will put forward, so that at least we're able to help the population. Because our responsibility, our role, as from my perspective as a special rapporteur, is to help the member states, to help the population to understand the real issues in controversy at any point in time when it comes to implementation and domestication of the Maputo Protocol. But the book also provides a critical analysis of the existing legal frameworks, highlighting their strengths, which is very important, the weaknesses, because that is also very important. What are the areas that we need to build and strengthen, and the areas where reform is urgently needed. It also explores the various legal and policy approaches that have been adopted across the continent, offering valuable lessons and insights for policymakers and advocates. In many parts of Africa, we are witnessing a resurgent debate around the so-called, as we say, decriminalisation of FGM. This is dangerous rhetoric, threatens to undermine decades of progress and erode the hard-won legal protection that safeguard the rights of women and girls. A case in point, like I said, is the situation in the Gambia, where we had a collective approach. Satang, you were there. Laura, as part of the EDVAL platform, you took part in that multi-sectoral approach that we adopted. We had the special rapporteur on violence against women. We had religious leaders. We had traditional leaders. So approach is very important. So it just to cite Gambia as a case in point in terms of, having made real gains at the national level in terms of law, in terms of practice. In fact, it got to the point where we could confidently say that it wasn't very clear because we didn't have the data and the statistics, but so many people were living the practice. Even those who were directly involved as practitioners were coming out to advocate against the practice of FGM. But by the time the issue came up, it was very difficult even to get one of them, those we thought we had already converted, to even come and speak out. That just actually reinforces the point made by Laura that when these things are deeply ingrained in our cultural norms and values, sometimes some little trigger can actually sway you to the other side. And as we say, sometimes FGM is always the starting point. Who knows? Just who knows what else we're going to have. So the collection serves as a powerful counter-narrative to this regressive movement. It underscores the urgent need for sustained vigilance, the importance of robust legal frameworks in the fight against FGM. In other words, let's not rest on our laurels when we make progress. We cannot afford to rest on our laurels. Advocacy and sensitization has to be on a sustained basis, so that way we are assured that the gains made will not be lost, and then we're able to make inroads going forward. So in that case, the book is an invaluable resource for a wide range of stakeholders. For policymakers, it provides the evidence-based analysis and practical guidance needed to develop and implement effective legal strategies. This reinforces the fact that as policymakers, sometimes you can't just go and say, this is it. You have to have evidence, and this is what the book provides. For legal practitioners also, those of us who are in the field and trying to practice the law in terms of what the protocol says, what the national legislation says also, it offers a comprehensive review of the relevant legal frameworks and precedents from other jurisdictions that we can use to convince the members of the judiciary. For advocates also, those who are not before the court, is also equip them with the knowledge and tools to challenge harmful practices and promote the rights of women and girls. For academics and researchers, it provides a rich source of data and analysis for further study and inquiry, because the job is not done by just this one publication. It has to be on a sustained basis. So this is the first step towards so many, I'm hoping. For community leaders, this is very important, because in our advocacy, we're saying that we have to target community leaders. It fosters a deeper understanding of the legal and human rights dimension of FGM, so that when they talk to their communities, when they raise awareness of their communities, they can actually make reference to this. And for survivors, it amplifies their voices and experiences, ensuring that their perspectives are central to the discourse. I think this is very important, because for whatever approach you have, we have to have a survivor-centered approach. This is the way to go. So survivors should be at the center of everything we do, and we should be able to amplify their voices. And when we advocate and raise awareness, we have to use those who've gone through it. Who feels it? They say knows it best. So it's always good to have the survivor. So the volume is a call to action for all of us to work together with renewed vigor and determination to ensure that the rights of women and girls are protected and the future generation are free from this harmful practice. So in brief, this is the perspective I have, and this is my understanding of the volume and the call to action that we all have a responsibility to respond to. I thank you all for your kind attention. And Satang, I will look forward to getting feedback on several perspectives that have been shared and generated from this convening, because unfortunately, I have to leave because I have to get back to my meeting. I left the meeting, I have to go back to the meeting. I thank you all for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Salanjai, for taking the time out of your session ongoing, but also for your continued support as well. We're very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Satang. Thank you.
On that note, I do want to invite at this point Professor Kimani, Professor Samuel Kimani, Associate Professor in the Department of Nursing at the University of Nairobi, to give us a couple of reflections from his chapter, as I said, especially given his unique background in this context as well. Over to you, Professor Kimani.
Okay, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. And thank you, Satang, for the opportunity and the readership that you provided in making sure that this become a success, and our great appreciation to Professor Ngwena and the family. So,
thank you. Just to say, we're not seeing you, just in case if your video.
You cannot see me.
We
sorry.
cannot.
Now
yes.
you can see me.
Sorry. Yes.
Are you able
there
to
you go. Yes, we just saw you for a second, and then yes, we're seeing you now. Okay. Over to you. Thank you. Bye.
Apologies for that. So I am Samuel Kimani. I work for University of Nairobi. I come from the Faculty of Health Sciences, and I had the opportunity to work with a team that worked across different chapters. And my role was to bring perspective around medicalization of FGM. And medicalization of FGM here means FGM performed by healthcare workers, nurses, midwives, clinic officers, and also doctors. So we all know that, and this is a new trend that we have continued to see in form of the direction the practice is taking. And this chapter highlights what is medicalization. And one of the challenges we faced is, for example, how do you define medicalization? Of course, the WHO have defined it as any situation in which healthcare workers perform FGM on girls or women for non-medical reasons. But when you look at what it entails in terms of typology of the WHO, nobody knows. It could mean type 1, it could mean type 2, it could mean type 3. And related to FGM, there are also medicalization. There are also other dynamics that are coming in, and I'm going to look at that. So I was able to say, for example, why does it happen? So one of the drivers around medicalization is actually an intended consequence of the roles that we have and the legal environment that we have put in our countries. So for a long time, FGM has been prohibited, and therefore medicalization offers a pathway for communities to continue performing FGM because girls can be cut less and they can be able to recover very quickly. And in the process, then the law enforcement cannot be able to catch up with them. So that is one aspect. The second aspect of it is the narrative that has been in addressing FGM. For a long time, communities and also programmers and implementers have addressed FGM as a harmful practice, a harmful practice that is associated with the health complications. So communities wonder and say, okay, this is our good culture. It is a culture that we have carried on from generation to generation. How else can we make it? And it is actually being associated with the bad things on our girls. So how can we make it better? And they thought that the doctors and the healthcare workers can resolve this. So medicalization is performed in a disguise to be a safer practice because of the narrative. And we are going to see, for example, even when medicalization is performed, it is not safer. That is a discourse that we have put in this chapter so that everybody is able to know about it. The second thing, of course, is medicalization is also performed by doctors and healthcare workers who come from the same communities. And when they provide the services, they are constituted to be providing essential services to the community. So the status is improved, and they get a lot of support from the community. So this is something that we also brought out in the chapter. But even more importantly, we were also able to demonstrate that medicalization is on the increase. In countries where medicalization has started to come down, for example, in Kenya, we have seen, where FGM has started to come down, we have seen communities starting to increase in terms of the way they are performing medicalization. So what is the conclusion drawn from there? We are saying medicalization is trying to normalize female genital mutilation, and there is a likelihood that if medicalization continues, it's likely to roll back all the efforts that have been done or has been put in place for addressing this practice of FGM. So I've looked at some of the motivating factors over and above adhering to the communities. A lot of medical doctors are also performing FGM because of motivations. And one of the motivation is actually financial motivation. So medical doctors, healthcare workers are performing FGM as a way of getting income. And this is of importance because when you look at it, then you ask yourself, is this practice going to end if the motivating factor is money? And therefore, they are going to circumvent all the rules. They're going to circumvent all the rules that are there so that they can continue getting money from cutting girls. And it is not only cutting girls. It is because the package of FGM brings other advantages. So the communities are going to be looking at seeking other services like the reproductive and sexual health services from the same doctor. So in terms of financial advantage, it becomes very enormous. Maybe we could ask ourselves, where does then medicalization happen? I say, for example, the data show that in Africa, not in Africa, at least we have 5 countries that contribute to over 90% of medicalization, and these are Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, Djibouti, and Guinea, including Sudan, around 6 of them. So when you look at that, you can actually see a pattern, and one of the patterns is the key drivers is the narrative. The second one is also the language that we are also talking about. Increasingly, communities are now starting to say, we are not going to call this practice FGM. So the politics around here are communities are naming FGM or what you call medicalization, other names. And when you hear, for example, a word like SUNA, then you know that this is a way of attributing FGM to the region. And therefore, as a honorable member of parliament have said, it becomes very difficult for you to start questioning religious issues. The second thing, even in Kenya, for example, we have started to see communities saying, we are no longer practicing FGM because we stopped doing the severe type of FGM. We are doing the lesser type of FGM, and they call it SUNA, they call it Kisasa. Kisasa means modern. So the politics around naming is very important when it comes to issues to do with medicalization. So what are the issues around this issue? So when you come to addressing medicalization, there are 2 models that I have highlighted in my chapter. So the first model is what we call health model, and the health model believes in healthcare workers consider themselves to be offering a less severe type of FGM as opposed to traditionally performed FGM. And in the process, they are looking like they are saving the girls and women from complications. So for them, they feel that they have a role to reduce the harms through maybe, for example, reducing pain, reducing bleeding, and possibly shock, and maybe the girls are not going to die. So that is the harm reduction model. And when you look at most of the healthcare workers, they will entertain this model compared, and they even say, if I don't perform FGM on this girl is going to go to quack, or she's going to go to a traditional kata, and the complication will be dire. So that is the model that is there. The second model is the human rights model. And we all know that the human rights model talks about zero tolerance to FGM. That is including medicalization. So there is a there's a tension between the two models. And when you look at people who are addressing medicalization, they need to navigate around those two models. And we need to see how can we be able to reconcile the two so that we have a model that is going to accommodate all these divergence in view. Remember, one of the key points we have highlighted in the medicalization chapter is that there is no medical doctor, no healthcare worker who has been trained to perform FGM. So the question we ask is, what skills do the healthcare worker use when they are performing FGM? And I give this analog and I say, if you compare the skills of a healthcare worker vis-a-vis the skills of a traditional cutter, the traditional cutter would be an expert in performing FGM. A medical doctor would be a quack. And that is where it stops, because medical doctors and healthcare workers are obligated not to perform any procedure, medical or surgical, if they have not been performed on. So by performing that, then they are negating the do no harm principle. They are also negating the safeguarding principle. And even more importantly, they are also going against the Hippocratic oath. And for us, the recommendation here and the call is we need to continue reminding the doctors that they need to adhere to the medical ethics. And that is the clarion call. So the politics around medicalization need to be revisited. Of course, one of the highlights is around the issue of, for example, performing FGM as a safer practice by the healthcare providers. There are countries that even came up with a policy, for example, Egypt or even other countries like Indonesia. And they set a platform where medicalization would take root. And when you look at some of those countries like Egypt, medicalization is as high as 84%. So that tells you what government did, deliberately or without any consideration, has implications, and it has impact on how a process can get rooted, and it becomes very difficult to remove. So for us, the clarion call here is we need to work with the government, we need to work with the policymakers, we need to work with the programmers and implementers so that we can have, and even communities, so that by the end of the day, we have a concurrency on how we need to move forward, addressing FGM from both perspectives, whether medicalization of FGM or traditional FGM. So this chapter is very important for us because the emphasis here is both very important for the academician, but also for the programmers, because FGM is an emerging threat to all the efforts we have put for many years. And therefore, we need to make sure that the doctors are educated, they are trained, and we have guidelines on how they can be able to address different aspects of FGM, including medicalization. And the last bit is, of course, the narrative that medicalization is safe is not safe. We have had evidence, which is also captured in the chapter, that in some countries, for example, Indonesia, healthcare workers were actually cutting more severely compared to the traditional cutters, diffusing the narrative that medicalization FGM is safer compared to traditional FGM. So I'll stop there, and I'm available for more questions. Thank you very much, Satang, and thank you very much for the audience.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Samuel, for your reflections, but particularly for the chapter as well, which as you already highlighted is an important chapter in this collection, and it also aligns very well, particularly given that recently WHO, HRP, recent launch of the WHO guidelines on FGM prevention and care, particularly targeted at healthcare providers as well. And this is just a plug. We'll have a forthcoming commentary on the WHO guidelines on FGM prevention and care with the International Journal of Gynecology and Obstetrics. And I should say, and because we also do have Professor Rebecca Cook with us here today, who's an editor of the IJGO journal, that the conception of eventually the theme of the colloquium really started from her encouragement with my 2019 article looking at both the ethical as well as the legal dimension on FGM. And over the years, she has been a constant in terms of sending materials and pushing for more work around this issue. And I'm glad that she's able to join us today. But also given that as well, the book is dedicated to Professor Gwena, who was a close friend and collaborator of hers as well. So many thanks again, Professor Rebecca Cook, for being here with us, and Samuel for your reflection as well. I'll now turn on, last but not the least, I'd like to invite Professor Mariam Abdulrahim Mustafa from the Faculty of Law at the University of Ilorin, Nigeria. As I said, especially if you look at the contributors' bios, and please do look at the book. It's open access, and the link will be shared again. It has already been shared that we do have folks, as I said, from various disciplines, from Samuel, from the health perspective, to having the lawyers, to the survivors, to the academics, but also with Professor Abdulrahim Mustafa, whose specialization is on criminology as well. So over to you, Professor Abdulrahim Mustafa, for your brief reflection on your chapter, given as we wrap up the book launch. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Satang Nabaneh. I'm so grateful for this opportunity. So to all, I say good afternoon or good morning to you all, wherever you are. I want to start by aligning myself with the existing protocol. I say good afternoon to you all. Actually, my contribution, my own chapter as a contribution to this publication is in the perspective of Nigeria, for us to know what is female genital mutilation, how is it practiced in Nigeria, and the posture that can be in Nigeria, decriminalize this practice, or should we continue to criminalize it? So I look at it from 3 perspectives. The first one is the statutory aspect of it, which is a criminalization. Then the other one is in respect of a religious perspective. Looking at the religious perspectives, my chapter is able to distill what religion's doctrine says about female genital mutilation. As we all know, that this female genital mutilation practice remains a significant public health and human rights issue. And most especially, in my paper, I was able to explain how this female genital mutilation is so harmful to sexual and reproductive rights, being a right that is part of our human rights enshrined in the Constitution, and of course, in all the bills of rights in all African countries. So what I did is to did an interdisciplinary approach to see whether criminalizing female genital mutilation in Nigeria is effective, or should we continue with religious inclination of having female genital mutilation in Nigeria? So the chapter is able to explain that yes, in Nigerian context, female genital mutilation is deep into our system in Nigeria. But looking at the angle of sexual and reproductive rights, the paper, I observe that there is a lot of harms, especially from the angle of those that are handling the practice. So I was able to do a content analysis of the legal framework and even the institutional framework dealing with female genital mutilation in Nigeria. And I look at both the Islamic perspective, the Christianity perspective, and even the traditional perspective of female genital mutilation practice in Nigeria. And I was able to do empirical findings. I did an empirical survey to interview some stakeholders in this field. Stakeholders, I mean, both those personnel in handling female genital mutilation practice and even the victims of mutilation. So I interviewed all these stakeholders, and I was able to classify my findings into 3. The first category are those that are pro-female genital mutilation in Nigeria. And I also classified it under anti-female genital mutilation in Nigeria. And the third classification is in respect of those human rights approach. So those that are pro-human rights groups that argue that female genital mutilation should be criminalized and abolished. In looking at this, I look at our Nigeria's laws that deals with female genital mutilation, especially the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act of 2015. This act, especially under its section 6, criminalized the practice and make it an offense in Nigeria. But the problem that we have, which I observe in my work, is that customary and religious aspect of it has already killed down this issue of criminalization. And the reason behind this is because the practice is being done in secrecy. When we go to the rural areas, hardly will you see anybody coming up to tell us about how he or her daughter is being mutilated. So it's a very practice that is in secrecy, that there's no any physical or what will I put it? Physical examination of how it looks like, how it causes dangers to the gender or female gender. But in the course of my empirical studies, I was able to get some facts from the participants who are able to tell us that this practice, although culturally they want it, religiously some want it, but when you look at it in the angle of sexual and reproductive rights, then it causes more harm than benefit. Something that causes more harm than benefit, then for goodness sake, how do we now indulge in that kind of practice? So, under the cultural aspect of it, those being interviewed in the course of the work were able to tell me that yes, it's their culture, but it's better to eradicate this culturally because of the harm that it caused to their daughters. In fact, culturally, they made me to understand that the purpose or the justification for indulging in this practice is because they want their female gender, the girls, to be circumcised so that they will not become prostitutes. Fortunately enough for me, during my field work, I was able to administer or to interrogate this aspect of culture from a prostitute in my field work, that now you are a prostitute. And the justification for having this practice is because the culture don't want female gender to become prostitute. And that prostitute was able to answer that she answered in the negative. That now, look at me, that's what she said, that look at me. I'm a sex worker and I've been circumcised. Then why can't that circumcision reduce my zeal for sex? If really the justice or the justification behind female genital mutilation is because of reducing female gender from prostitution, then here I am in practice of sex. I'm a sex worker. So that means that practice should be eradicated. That is according to that participant. And I also interviewed a participant who, before being married, she was completely virgin. And at the end of the day, she discovered that this issue of culture should be eradicated because the harm that is caused is more than the benefit behind it. Looking at the religious aspect of it, I was able to go deep into, thank God I'm a Muslim, I was able to go deeply into what Islamic injunction says about female genital mutilation. And when I look at the religious aspect of it under the Islamic point of view, I discover that both the Quran and the Hadith, that is the sayings of our prophet, that what this female genital mutilation, it says that it is not obligatory. It is permissible. So to show that something that is not obligatory cannot be imposed or enforced on anybody. Anybody that wishes to do it and anybody that says is not doing it should not be punished. So it's permissible, it's not obligatory. Yeah. If it's not obligatory, then why are we saying that it shouldn't be eradicated? Mm-hmm. Looking at the Christianity point of view, I also go deeply into what the biblical junction says about female genital mutilation. In fact, in the Bible, it is already been abolished. In the traditional point of view, the culture says the reason why they want it is because they don't want their female gender to become a prostitute. Then I was able to interview a sex worker that said no. So looking at the human rights perspective, human rights perspective, I was able to see that when we take this issue of female genital mutilation into sexual and reproductive rights, then of course, we are to clamor or to cry or to advocate for its eradication because it does more harm than benefit.
Thank you, Prof.
Luckily enough, Nigeria as sorry, Nabella?
Yeah, I was gonna say we're almost at time, so just spotlighting
okay.
Yeah,
so, let me just round up by saying that conclusively in my paper, I was able to say that criminalization of female genital mutilation in Nigeria is not sufficient. It's not sufficient. We need to involve social legal approach, which anchor both legal enforcement and cultural transformation. It's very essential in order to make sure that female genital mutilation is being brought to the minimum or being abolished in our system in Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prof, for your chapter, the empirical nature and the data that you also provided, as well as we said, the book is fantastic, even if I can say so myself. So please do download, open access as well. And so I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you to all the speakers today for their insightful reflections, particularly as it relates to the book and its relevance as a valuable resource for so many people. I know we wanted to do Q&A, but we're at time or beyond time at this point. But I do, before I wrap up the session, and many thanks to folks that have been dropping questions in the chat as well. Samuel, I know there are a couple of questions, so please do engage, especially with the chapter authors, with the folks asking questions in the chat. And also to say as well, at this point, I do want to also note, I think there was a comment on interpretation in French. Unfortunately, we do not have that. We do appreciate your attendance of the event, but also that obviously, whilst the book is valuable as well, one of the key things that we did want to include was really the Francophone Africa perspective that we were unfortunately unable to in the end. And we do hope that perhaps the next iterations of this will also include Francophone Africa as well, which is a vital space in that. I do want to wrap up by inviting Mama Patricia Ngwener, who's here with us, to if possible, just to share a quick reflection, a minute or two, if there was something you wanted to share before we wrap up. And again, thank you so much for being here with us, Mama Patricia. Over to you.
Satang, and thank you, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay, first and foremost, I'm so grateful to be here. Even if you didn't invite me, I was going to invite myself because I know for sure that Charles, you wouldn't have missed this opportunity. And it also allows me to see all his close colleagues, his students, and everybody else. And there is, and Tete is there. Farida, I will tell you what Tete means later in Shona. But I am just grateful that I know Charles would have been over the moon to be here at this particular platform, because while the book was prepared and it took some time, he was really waiting to see the outcome of it. And it's a long story, but when Satang started, she was just interested in doing her master's, and that is all. And because we speak so much in this house, even though Charles is not there anymore, I'm speaking to myself, but our kitchen table is our discussion about his work, about his students. And he told me about Satang that if Satang thinks she's going to finish and then just leave it, she's mistaken, because Africa needs to be uplifted. And there is no way that I can let that girl go back. Then I said, are you going to chain her? Because she's in the US. She says, wherever she is, I'll find it. And there, indeed, Satang finished. And everybody else. And I called all of them, from Ebenezer to Satang to, oh gosh, dozens of students, former students, who are now professors and doctors and everything else. I call them Charles's disciples, whether they like it or not, but they are his disciples. I used to tease him. I said, well, your disciples are more than Paul's disciples. And they will laugh about it, because it was always about work. And his work is about making sure that an African child, particularly a woman, is not victimized. And that was his calling up to the last end. In the plane traveling to South Africa, he was reading Yumba's work. This person just worked and worked and worked. And this platform, it just makes me so happy to see that the legacy of this particular Shona man, all the way from Zim, he did so much work at a very short period of time, because going to heaven at 67 is rather too young. And I won't say much, because if I start, okay, for this book particularly, when it was still in conception, I said to Charles, can I invite myself for a chapter from an African perspective, but writing as a theologian? And I just want to see that how far can I go in the FGM, looking at culture from a theological perspective, because biblically it is a shame to even think of FGM. And then Charles says, we are not going to do anything of that sort. You are not my student. You don't work at the center. I don't want to hear anything about you. So all I'm saying that I supported every work of it, of whatever Charles did. We discussed it at home, and I will put my input. And our discussion is always interesting, because this is a lawyer who is a human rights lawyer, and it's all about evidence and how can the world change. And I'm coming from the faith background. And so our discussions is always very, very interesting, to say the least. And the children, they've had enough of it. And no wonder they've all left. Thank you for everyone, really, really. Seeing Farida, Rebecca, and everyone else, it just warms my heart. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mama Patricia, for your resilience, your strength, your love, and for sharing Charles, and continue to share him, his memory, his legacy with all of us. We're incredibly privileged to have been mentored and supported by him as well. And as I did say, now to Ebenezer, I definitely am the favorite. So I think that debate is done. Anyway, but yeah, as Ebenezer also rightly said, we do have some upcoming volume, especially the one that he led on abortion reform in Africa, which is also dedicated in his honor. So many thanks again. And in the preface, I did echo his words when we were conceptualizing the colloquium, when he reminded us that this book is not about throwing out the baby with the bathwater, right? But it is really a call for us to be and engage in nuanced, context-specific approaches that obviously complement legal frameworks, but also looks at other approaches and initiatives and perspectives as we engage in the complexities of FGM criminalization with regard to this book as well. And so as we conclude, I know we're at time. I just want to say again, many thanks for everybody being here with us, but also I do want to say many thanks to the individuals that made this book possible, to all the authors. Thank you so much to colleagues at the center, particularly the sexual and reproductive rights doctoral candidates, so Kerigo, Benson, as well as Yumba for their support during the colloquium and after, Rutendo for organizing the colloquium, but also her continued support in this process as well. Obviously, as you know, when we do colloquiums, we have the reviewers who provide both oral comments, but also written comments as well. And those included Professor Gwena himself, Kata Murungi, Ebenezer, Sibogile Dasher, Godfrey Kangwa, Ade Johnson, as well as Nkata Kabira. Thank you so much to the Pretoria University Law Press editorial team. Many thanks to Lizette. I know you're so tired of me, but I do appreciate your support in this process and in future ones as well. And David Ikpo was the one who designed the book cover. Many thanks. And Simpiwe, as well as the COMS folks, for really helping us put together this virtual lunch as well. So thank you so much for being here and in furthering our collective goal. We do call and encourage you to download the book. As we said, it's open access. This was very intentional. It's published in the leading African publisher on the continent, open access, because we do want it to be one that is useful and of utility to varied actors, whether states, practitioners, academics, as well as activists and advocates on the ground as well. So please do share widely and engage deeply with the ideas as well. Again, many thanks for being part of this important event. I appreciate it. Thank you. Over to you, Simpiwe. Thanks.
Thank you
So much. Thanks, everybody.